judgment, maturity, social awareness, and a commitment to serve all people are characteristics that your Chief Magistrate must possess. As a candidate for Crisp County Chief Magistrate, I offer these characteristics to you, and I ask for your vote and your support. We're living in a crucial time. Many things have changed, but my commitment to serve the citizens of Crisp County has never wavered. Whether you vote by mail-in ballot, early vote, or go to the polls on Tuesday, November 3rd, I'm Isaac Owens, and I ask for your vote and your support.
The J.W. Wings Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Wings Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Wings Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcements for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program.
Yes, sir.
Family of Miss Martha Jewel Chimes of Vienna, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran, Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis, Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mr. William Lewis Kitchens of Cordele, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran, Mr. Charlie Smith, Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Tommy Lee Brown, Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Bryant Keith Oliver of Cordele, Georgia. The family of beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman, Mrs. Eddie Rhea Walker of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Louise Lowe Applin of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Miss Martha Jewel Chives, age 68, 512 Harold Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Tuesday, September 29th at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Martha Jewel Chives was held Sunday, October 4th, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend David Thomas, pastor of the Evergreen Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include one loving and devoted daughter, Miss Sandra Chives, and her husband, Mr. Antonio Chives of Unadilla, Georgia. Two beloved granddaughters, Miss Alicia Lucas and Miss Felicia Lucas, both of Warner Robins, Georgia. 9 beloved great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted mother, Mother Ruth Chives of Vienna, Georgia. 3 loving and devoted sisters, Miss Ella Colbert of Deerfield Beach, Florida, Miss Hattie Chives of Donington, Florida, and Mrs. Linda Woodson and her husband, Mr. Eddie Woodson of Vienna, Georgia. 4 beloved brothers, Mr. L.C. Chives, Jr., and his wife, Mrs. Gloria Chives of Port Royal, South Carolina, Mr. Willie Chives and his wife, Mrs. Anna Chives of El Paso, Texas, Mr. Claude Chives and his wife, Mrs. Catherine Chives of Vienna, Georgia, and Mr. Wendell Chives of Woodbridge, Virginia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Martha Jewel Chives, age 68, of 512 Harold Street, Vienna, Georgia. United States Army veteran, Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis, Jr., age 26, 107 Acadia Street, Americus, Georgia, died Tuesday, September 29th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. The funeral service with military honors for United States Army veteran Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis, Jr. was held Sunday, October 4th, graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. His pastor, Elder Warren Alford, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted parents, Mr. Eddie and Mrs. Cynthia Davis of Americus, Georgia. His beloved sisters, Miss Chevy L. Davis of Marietta, Georgia, and Miss LaQuasia Davis of Americus, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Flinza Davis Sr. of Americus, Georgia. His beloved grandparents, Miss Anna Ruth Davis, Mrs. Fanny Harris Butler, and Mr. John Butler, all of Americus, Georgia. His beloved aunts, Mrs. Dorothy Patterson, and her husband, Mr. Raymond Patterson, Miss Beverly Jones, Mrs. Cassandra Roberts, and her husband, Mr. Moses Roberts, all of Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Frances Reddick of Jonesboro, Georgia, and Mrs. Pearl Robinson and her husband, Mr. John Robinson of St. Petersburg, Florida. One beloved uncle, Mr. Christopher Butler of Americus, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, a host of aunts and uncles, beloved cousins, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include his special friend, Mr. Chauncey Shaw, Mr. Alex Armita, Mr. Jaden Crosby, Mr. Quentin Blake, and Mr. Quinlan Blake, and Mr. Maurice Sanford, Jr., his beloved godchildren, Callie Marie Shaw and James Bernard Shaw, and his Victory Worship Center family, the class of 2013, and his Buffalo Wild Wing crew survived. United States Army veteran, Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis, Jr., age 26, 107 Acadia Street, Americus, Georgia. Mr. William Lewis Kitchens, age 78, of 907 Chris Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Monday, September 7th at his residence. The funeral service for Mr. William Lewis Kitchen, age 78, was held Wednesday, October 7th, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Patsy Vines of Washington, D.C., Miss Mary Kitchen, and Miss Estella Kitchen, both of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Floyd Kitchens of Washington, D.C., his beloved aunts and uncle, Mrs. Alma Williams of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Gloria Jackson and Mr. Walter Jackson, both of Washington, D.C., a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survived. Mr. William Lewis Kitchens, age 78, of 1907 Chris Street, Cordele, Georgia. United States Army veteran, Mr. Charlie Smith Sr., age 73, of 712 West 22nd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, September 1st at Regency Hospital in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service with military honors for United States Army veteran, Mr. Charlie Smith Sr., was held Thursday, October 8th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia, Veterans Section. Minister DeJuan Griggs delivered words of comfort. Survivors include his beloved and caring children, Mr. Gerald Smith of Daytona Beach, Florida, Ms. Tangela Young of DeLand, Florida, Mr. Charlie Smith Jr. of Daytona Beach, Florida, Ms. Alexis Smith of Jacksonville, Florida, and Miss Sonia Smith, 10 beloved grandchildren, a host of great-grandchildren, his beloved uncles, Mr. Johnny C. Daniels and Mr. Marion Smith, both of Cordele, Georgia, a host of cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survived. United States Army veteran, Mr. Charlie Smith Sr., age 73, of 712 West 22nd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Sr., age 69, of 708 South 9th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at Neverson Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Sr., age 69, was held Friday, October 9th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Brother James Wise of the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah Witnesses officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Ira B. Harris Brown of Cordele, Georgia. His loving and beloved children, Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Jr. of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Nikita Harris, Mr. Freddie B. McLeod, Mr. Frederick McLeod, Mrs. Michelle Smith, and Miss Keisha Gaines, all of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Sonia Gaines of Atlanta, Georgia. 8 beloved grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren, his beloved and caring sisters, Mrs. Alice Lester, and her husband, Mr. Archie Lester of Americus, Georgia, Mrs. Gail Beal, and her husband, Mr. Alvin Beal, and Mrs. Lovetta Corbin, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Ashley Clark and his wife, Mrs. Monica Clark, and Mr. Roosevelt Brown, both of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts, Mrs. Alberta Trotman, Mrs. Barbara Mitchell and her husband, Mr. Freddie Mitchell, Mrs. Maggie Bell Brown, and Mrs. Rose Brown, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers and sisters-in-law, Mr. Lonnie Walker and his wife, Mrs. Barbara Walker, the Reverend Nikita Lester and his wife, Mrs. Eddie Mae Lester, and Mr. Johnny Lester, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. David Lester and his wife, Mrs. Renee Lester of El Paso, Texas, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include his special friend, Mr. Wayne Hobb and Mr. Derek Dix, both of Cordele, Georgia, survived. Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Sr., age 69, of 708 South 9th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Brian Keith Oliver, better known as Doc, age 48, of 510 West 11th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Monday, September 28th, of injuries sustained in an accident. Funeral service for Mr. Brian Keith Oliver, better known as Doc, age 48, was held Saturday, October 10th, graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted sisters, Miss Tamika L. Oliver and her companion, Mr. T-Mark Prime, Miss Demetrius L. Oliver and her companion, Mr. Roderick Paul, Miss Teresa M. Oliver, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved and caring brothers, Mr. Larry Oliver Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Teresa Oliver, Mr. Lorenzo Oliver and his wife, Mrs. Lorinda Oliver, and Mr. Kenneth Oliver and his wife, Mrs. Cassandra Oliver, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. Bobby Finn and his wife, Mrs. Brenda Faye Finn, and Mr. Robbie Finn and his wife, Mrs. April Finn, both of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Reuben Finn of West Palm Beach, Florida, Mrs. Burnell Finn and Miss Gladys Oliver, both of Atlanta, Georgia. Miss Gracie Jones of Vallejo, California, Mrs. Lena Mae Oliver of Adel, Georgia, Miss Alice Pierce of Riviera Beach, Florida, and a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include Deacon Raymond and Mrs. Linda Rollins, Mr. F.D. Lawton, Mr. Frederick Paul, the Green family, Miss Tay Talbert and son, and Mr. David Grant. Survived Mr. Bryant Keith Oliver, better known as Doc, age 48, of 510 West 11th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman, Mrs. Eddie Rhea Ross Walker, age 81, of 703 North Mayo Street, Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, October 1st, at the Lillian G. Carter Rehabilitation Center in Plains, Georgia. The funeral service for beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman, Mrs. Eddie Rhea Ross Walker, age 81, was held Saturday, October 10th, graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. The Reverend Gloria Wynn, pastor of the Campbell Chapel AME Church, officiated. The eulogy was delivered by the Reverend George Frank Montz Jr. Survivors include her loving and devoted daughter, Mrs. Fannie Rhea Walker Brown, and her husband, Mr. Eddie Brown of Apopka, Florida. Her beloved grandchildren, Telvin, Alan, Tiffany, Laura, Alexis, and Joshua. 9 great-grandchildren, her beloved goddaughter, Miss Mary Nell Morgan of New York, her beloved cousin, Miss Jacqueline Walker of Americus, Georgia, her close friends, Mrs. LaDaisy Sharp King of Virginia, Miss Bernice Sharp of Americus, Georgia, and her beloved sorority sister of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. Survived beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman, Mrs. Eddie Rhea Ross Walker, age 81, of 703 North Mayo Street, Americus, Georgia. Mother Louise Lowe Applin, age 84, of 716 West 17th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, October 4th, at the Cordele Health and Rehabilitation Center in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Louise Lowe Applin, age 84, was held Saturday, October 10th, at the graveside at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Dr. Ulysses Morgan officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Rosalind Mason and her husband, Mr. Richard Mason, Mr. Capers Shank and his wife, Mrs. Karen Shank, Mr. Ori Oji, Mr. Marvin Shank, Mrs. Robin Applin, Mr. George Applin Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Sharon Applin, Mr. Gary Applin and his wife, Mrs. Evelyn Applin, and Miss Lisa Applin. 30 beloved grandchildren, 19 great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted siblings, Mr. Nathaniel Lowe and his wife, Mrs. Maggie Lowe, Mr. Marvin Lowe and his wife, Mrs. Tempe Lowe, Mr. James Lowe and his wife, Miss Maxine Lowe, Mr. Jerry Lowe and his wife, Mrs. Ruby Lowe, Mrs. Dorothy Williams and her husband, Mr. David Williams, and Mrs. Jeanette Morgan and her husband, Mr. Eddie Morgan, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survived. Mother Louise Lowe Applin, age 84, of 716 West 17th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Again, the family of Miss Martha Jewel Chives of Vienna, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis Jr. of Americus, Georgia, the family of Mr. William Lewis Kinchins of Cordele, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. Charlie Smith Sr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Sr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Bryant Keith Oliver of Cordele, Georgia, the family of beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman Mrs. Eddie Rhea Ross Walker of Americus, Georgia, the family of Mother Louise Lowe Applin of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during the hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins, age 58, of 319 Fairfield Apartments, Vienna, Georgia, died Monday, October 5th, at her residence in Vienna, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Roderick T. Brown and his wife, Mrs. Deborah Brown of Chesapeake, Virginia, and Mrs. Samantha S. Stewart and her husband, Mr. Keon Stewart of Irving, Texas. Her loving grandchildren, Brianna, Dalen, Derera, and David. Her loving and devoted mother, Mother Leslie May Harris of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved sisters, Mrs. Betty B. Bryant and her husband, Mr. Hentley Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. Ms. Evelyn Brown of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Mrs. Tammy J. Brown and her husband, Mr. Veronica Brown of Peachtree Corners, Georgia. And Mrs. Rhonda L. Zellner and her husband, Mr. Walter Zellner of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Maurice B. Brown and his wife, Mrs. Tangela Brown of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Mr. Wilbert Earl Brown and his wife, Mrs. Carolyn Brown of Vienna, Georgia. A beloved uncle, Mr. James Brown of St. Petersburg, Florida. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins, age 59, of 319 Fairfield Apartments, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins will be held today, Sunday, October 11th at 12 noon, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Frederick Murray, pastor of the Turkey Creek Baptist Church of Lilly, Georgia, will officiate. United States Army veteran, Mr. James Irvin Porter, better known as Sugar Man, age 57, of 309 Oak Avenue West, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted daughter, Miss Paulette Porter of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved grandchildren, Xavier, Zahara, Raiden, and Romeo. His loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Thelma Beach Porter of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved sister, Mrs. Rondalyn Barron, and her husband, Mr. Kelvin Barron, Mrs. Christy Luttrell, and his wife and her husband, Mr. Wayne Luttrell, and Miss Janie Porter, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Harrison Porter and his wife, Mrs. Angela Porter of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Corey Porter and his wife, Mrs. Carrie Porter, and Deacon Donald Talbot and his wife, Mrs. Sharon Talbot, both of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Marie Porter, Miss Geraldine Porter Ford, Deacon Eddie Porter Jr., and Mr. Booker T. Porter, a beloved great aunt, Mrs. Gladys Lewis, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. United States Army veteran, Mr. James Irvin Porter, age 57, of 309 Oak Avenue, West Cordele, Georgia. The graveside memorial service for United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter will be held today, Sunday, October 11th at 3 p.m. at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, will officiate. Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida, died Monday, October 5th at the Good Shepherd Hospice in Auburndale, Florida. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Napoleon Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. Her loving and caring son, Mr. Napoleon Outlaw II, and his wife, Mrs. Candace Outlaw, Mr. Eric Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Courtney Outlaw, and Mr. Quentin Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Noel Outlaw. Her precious grandchildren, Napoleon III, Alicia, Aiden, Jaden, and Mackenzie. Her loving and devoted parents, Mr. Lindsay and Mrs. Mary Johnson. Her loving, devoted sisters, Miss Sylvia Garrett and her husband, Mr. Dale Garrett, Mrs. Annie Johnson Coven and her husband, Mr. Ben Coven, Miss Yolanda Johnson and her in-law, her beloved in-law, Mr. Jerome Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Ola Mae Outlaw, Mr. Victor Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Sandra Outlaw, and Miss Valerie Outlaw. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. The funeral service for Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw will be held Monday, October 12th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Dr. Kervin B. Lee will officiate. The walk-up public visitation will be held today from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Retired educator, Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin, age 74, of 807 Kings Way, Americus, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband of 31 years, Mr. Willie R. Golphin, a beloved daughter, Mrs. Tiara Sneed Floyd, and her husband, Mr. Lonnie Charles Floyd, all of Americus, Georgia. Two beloved granddaughters, Miss Nachosly Floyd of Dunwood, Georgia, and Miss Julia Floyd of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, retired Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Broner and his wife, Mrs. Dorothy Broner, Mr. Rufus Broner and his wife, Mrs. Michelle Broner of Jacksonville, Arkansas. Retired Major Lester Broner Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Anna Broner of Kennesaw, Georgia. Retired Sergeant Ronald Pace of Seattle, Washington, and Mr. Dennis Pace of Decatur, Georgia. Her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Janet B. Smith and Mrs. Fanny Anthony, both of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Regina Clark and her husband, Mr. John Clark of Stonebridge, Georgia. Her beloved aunts, Mrs. Minnie Lee Broner Battle, Mrs. Lily Taylor Cladd, Mrs. Elnora Taylor Gervin, Mrs. Lucy Bell Taylor Sims, all of Americus, Georgia, and missionary Lois Taylor of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved sisters-in-law, Mrs. Janice Davis and her husband, Mr. Donnie Davis of Byram, Georgia, Miss Burl Broner of Miami, Florida, and Miss Livonia Sneed Henderson of McDonald, Georgia. Two beloved brothers-in-law, the Reverend Freddie Golphin of Oglethorpe, Georgia, and Mr. James Eddie Golphin of Memphis, Tennessee. A host of nieces and nephews, cousins, other relatives, and special friends, Mrs. Addie B. Joseph of South Carolina, Mrs. Linda Dardell Polk of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Brenda Jackson of Montezuma, Georgia. Her beloved godson, Mr. Anthony T. Ware of Americus, Georgia, survived. Retired educator, Mrs. Elma Broner Sneed Golphin, age 76, of 807 Kings Way, Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for retired educator Mrs. Elma Broner Sneed Golphin will be held Monday, October 12 at 3 p.m. graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. The Reverend Jermaine Harris, pastor of the Allen Chapel AME Church, will officiate. The walk-up public visitation will be held today from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. The infant Cole Jamal Taylor of 108 North 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, September 30th at Emory Midtown Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. He survived by his parents, Mr. Kavashi Taylor and Miss Carisha Maddox of Cordele, Georgia. A host of other relatives survived the infant Cole Jamal Taylor of 108 North 15th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for the infant Cole Jamal Taylor will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of 107 Heather Street, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. Survivors include his beloved children, his loving sisters, Mrs. Martha Warren of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Mrs. Mary Burroughs of Cordele, Georgia, survived. Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of 107 Heather Street, Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Lonnie Kendrick will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, of 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th, at the Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Willie James Thorpe and his wife, Mrs. Melissa Thorpe, Mr. Kelvin Barron Sr. and his wife, Mrs. Rondalyn Barron, Mr. Carl Barron and Miss Cynthia Barron, all of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Nicholas Barron and his wife, Mrs. Michelle Barron of Jacksonville, Florida, 19 beloved grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, a beloved sister, Mother Mitt Bell Denard of Cordele, Georgia, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, of 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Louise Denise Barron will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, of 206 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 9th, at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. John L. Smith, Jr., and his wife, Mrs. LaShonda Smith, Miss Selena West, Miss Irene Smith, Mr. Ricky Smith, Mr. Jonathan Smith and his wife, Mrs. Lucretia Smith, Miss Melissa Smith, Mr. Brandon Clark and his wife, Miss Brenda Clark, Miss Wendy Wilson and Miss Michelle Johnson, Mr. Chris Pratt, Mr. Marcus Pratt, Mr. Shane Pratt, Mr. Mike Pratt, and Mr. Eric Pratt, all of Cordele, Georgia. 33 beloved grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, 5 great-great-grandchildren, his beloved and devoted sister, Mrs. Ethel Mumphrey, and her husband, Deacon Edward Mumphrey of Cordele, Georgia. A host of nieces, nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include a dear friend, Miss Kimberly Smith of Cordele, Georgia, survived. Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, of 206 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10, at the home of his beloved son in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. Willie McEntee and his wife, Mrs. Jackie McEntee of Columbia, South Carolina, Mr. Wilbert Davis and his wife, Mrs. Broslyn Davis of Macon, Georgia, Mrs. Monica McKellar and her husband, Mr. Charles McKellar of Lilly, Georgia, Mrs. Dolores Anderson and her husband, Mr. Ray Anderson of St. Petersburg, Florida, Ms. Rhonda Woodham and her husband, Mr. Darnell Woodham of Unadilla, Georgia, Mr. Octavius McEntee and his wife, Mrs. Noel McEntee, and Miss Lola McEntee, all of Albany, Georgia. 27 beloved grandchildren, 25 great-grandchildren, his beloved sisters, Mrs. Charlie M. Williams, Miss Sarah Mulford, Miss Lily Tukes, Mrs. Barbara Goins and her husband, Mr. Arthur Goins, Mrs. Jacqueline Lewis and her husband, Mr. Alexander Lewis, Miss Diane Whitfield and Miss Donna Howard and her husband, Mr. Marcus Howard, his beloved brothers, Mr. Wayman McEntee, Mr. Charlie Rush and his wife, Mrs. Linda Rush, Mr. Billy Joe Whitfield and his wife, Mrs. Cheryl Whitfield, Mr. Willie Whitfield Jr., Mr. Jerome Whitfield, and Mr. Telly Whitfield and his wife, Mrs. Joanna Whitfield, a host of nieces and nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Arthur James McEntee, age 80, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, of 4748 Franklin Road, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10, at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. Survivors include his loving and devoted parents, Mr. James Bryant Jr. and Mrs. Gertrude Blythe Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. James Bryant III and his wife, Mrs. Nikki Bryant. His loving grandmother, Mrs. Sandy Mae Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. A host of aunts and uncles, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, of 4748 Franklin Road, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Michael Waters, Sr., age 62, of 208 West 27th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Ms. Gwendolyn Dalster Waters of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved son, Mr. Torrio Waters, and Mr. Michael Waters Jr., and his wife, Mrs. Kimberly Waters, both of Cordele, Georgia. 3 beloved grandchildren, a beloved sister, Mrs. Georgia M. Waters Walker of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved brother, Mr. Christopher Porter of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, his beloved mother-in-law, Deacon Mrs. Gradine Ford, and her husband, Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. of Cordele, Georgia, his father-in-law, Deacon Charles Dalster, and his wife, Mrs. Joanne Dalster of Cordele, Georgia, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Michael Waters Sr., age 62, of 208 West 27th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Michael Waters Sr., age 62, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins, age 58, of 319 Fairfield Apartments, Vienna, Georgia, died Monday, October 5th at her funeral service for Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins will be held today, Sunday, October 11th at 12 noon, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Frederick Murray, pastor of the Turkey Creek Baptist Church, will officiate. United States Army veteran, Mr. James Irvin Porter, better known as Sugar Man, of age 57, of 309 Oak Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The graveside memorial service for United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter will be held today, Sunday, October 11th at 3 p.m. at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, will officiate. Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida, died Monday, October 5th at the Good Shepherd Hospice in Auburndale, Florida. The funeral service for Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw will be held Monday, October 12th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Public walk-up visitation will be held today from 1 until 5 at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin, age 74, of 807 Kings Way, Americus, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin, age 74, will be held Monday, October 12th at 3 p.m. at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. The walk-up public visitation will be held today from 1 until 5 at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. The infant Cole Jamal Taylor of 108 North 15th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, September 30th at Emory Midtown Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of 107 Heather Street, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. Ms. Louise Denise Barron, age 75, of 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th at Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, of 206 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 9th at his residence. Mr. Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th at the home of his beloved son in Albany, Georgia. Mr. Justin Bernard Bryan, age 30, of 4748 Franklin Road, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. Mr. Michael Waters Sr., age 62, of 208 West 27th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our program this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Miss Martha Jewel Chives of Vienna, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Eddie Thomas Davis Jr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mr. William Lewis Kitchens of Cordele, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Charlie Smith Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Tommy Lee Brown Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Bryant Keith Oliver of Cordele, Georgia. The family of beloved retired educator and past city councilwoman Mrs. Eddie Rhea Ross Walker of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Louise Lowe Applin of Cordele, Georgia. Our program is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins of Vienna, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. The family of retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin of Americus, Georgia. The family of the infant Cole Taylor of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Lenny Kendrick of Warner Robins, Georgia. The family of Miss Louise Denise Barron of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deacon John Lee Smith Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Arthur James McEntee of Lilly, Georgia. The family of Mr. Justin Bernard Bryan of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mr. Michael Waters Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. Our program is dedicated to all of the sick and shut in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad.
Yes, I'm going to walk. Oh, that will keep my wings. Oh, child.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Oh, some of these days, well, I'm going to walk and take up my stand.
Greetings, my name is Eric Bryant, candidate for sheriff of Sumter County. I'm asking for your support and commitment on electing me as your next sheriff. A vote for me is a vote for service and protection. I'm committed and dedicated to our community. So on November 3rd, elect me, Eric Bryant, sheriff of Sumter County.
Medicare planning can be be very scary and confusing for you and your loved ones, especially with scammers calling and so many commercials. That's why you need a local expert that you can trust. Call Angela Hatcher today at 229-938-7116. That's 229-938-7116.
Good character, sound judgment, maturity, social awareness, and a commitment to serve all people are characteristics that your chief magistrate must possess. As a candidate for Chris County Chief Magistrate, I offer these characteristics to you, and I ask for your vote and your support. We're living in a crucial time. Many things have changed, but my commitment to serve the citizens of Chris County has never wavered. Whether you vote by mail-in ballot, early vote, or go to the polls on Tuesday, November 3rd, I'm Isaac Owens, and I ask for your vote and your support.